Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about something that is, of course, an issue for all of us as we talk today, whether we talk about Punjab at this time, particularly Lahore, or we talk about the twin cities here, the issue of smog, the issue of the climate crisis that we are facing at this time as a result of changing weather patterns, also as a result of climate damage, is right before us. The seriousness of this topic, the seriousness of this issue for us cannot be emphasized enough. We'll be talking about what are the steps that can be taken to prevent this crisis from exasperating that we've seen. We've also be talking about the COP29 imperatives and Pakistan's goals with regard to that, our ability to work towards having the kind of finance, the kind of preparedness that is needed for us to be able to get to a point where we can get the maximum out of those that are able to do more for countries like Pakistan that suffer so much and yet are not responsible for, are responsible for less than 1% of fossil fuel emissions. We'll be talking about all of that today. I have with me Munir Ahmed, who is Executive Director, Devcom, and also a climate change expert. Thank you for being with us today. We also have with us Durreshawar Mahmood, who is Climate Policy and Finance Specialist at Oxford Policy Management. Thank you for joining us. We will also be joined by Fahad Malik, who is an environmental activist and climate justice advocate. Thank you for being with us today. I'm going to go with Munir Sahab. Munir Sahab, we've spoken about climate damage before. We've spoken about the effects. We've spoken about the fact that the injustice of it as far as Pakistan's responsibility to what they're facing is minimal. As far as the situation now is concerned, certainly it is beyond urgent. What is your assessment of where we are at this time?
Certainly. First of all, thank you very much. We are once again talking about this very urgent issue of climate change and climate finance, and it is the very buzzwords these days. And COP29, Conference of Parties, will be opening tomorrow, and hopefully they will be talking about all these issues once again, though the world could not come to any terms over 28 years. Whatever discussed or agreed on were not implemented. So is the case with Pakistan. Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable countries, as we have seen over the years, and the vulnerability is increasing.
That's what I want to come to. Of course, the vulnerability is increasing, and the effect at this time, when we look at cities like Lahore, cities, like Islamabad and Rawalpindi, which are of course under threat, Multan. Overall, was this expected? The way that it has become and the way that it is now. We talk about artificial rain. We talk about taking those measures at this time. The effectiveness of those measures, and first of all, was it expected that we would come to this so quickly where we are at this time?
We didn't reach this point very quickly. It's over the years once again. This is what I was trying to focus on. But unfortunately, despite all the alerts that have been given to Pakistani nation and to the authorities and to the organizations, we did not bother about those alerts. So we are facing the result of our ignorance and inaction. So smog is there. Now it is spreading in other cities as well. Heat wave is getting severe, and this is almost mid-November, and we are still suffering from the
no, the weather is completely changed.
Completely
Even
changed.
If you compare from last 10 years.
Yeah.
It's not,
we as we say, our carbon emissions are less than 1%, but we never talked about the deterioration that we have done with our natural resources, one thing. We could not negotiate transboundary issues with our neighbors successfully. We are taking measures at home, but the transboundary measures does matter.
Let me come to that. I want to talk more about this.
Certainly, we need to take many actions at home. For example, vehicular emissions. They are very important to reduce, and this is what we can do after like improving the vehicle's efficiency. And secondly, Punjab government is taking very stringent actions, and they have taken several strict actions that in Punjab, but it's too late for them. Like closing down the brick kilns, or like asking them to come to the zigzag technology. But it was about a decade back then we started about this.
You think it would have been more fruitful if we done it 10 years ago?
Then they have been more fruitful. And secondly, every individual has to play its role. And
let's come to that. Let's come to responsibility and where we are with regard to that. Let me take Durre on board with this also. Durre, when we talk about transboundaries, correct me if I'm wrong, transboundaries measures which Munir Sahib is talking about. As an expert, why are we not being able to negotiate them at this time, in your opinion? Because we're looking at what the statements coming from Delhi, we're looking at the statements that we are also making. It's fruitful for both the countries, and what the geographical position is not, it is what it is, right? So why are we not being able to do that?
So basically, if you compare the other regions like Africa, Pacific, today they all have collaboratively gathered to like work on climate action, whether it's mitigation or adaptation. But unfortunately, we still stuck up on the political honesty. We're still like stuck up, and we're still bringing that, we're giving them as a priority, but not talking about climate itself, right?
Okay.
So I somewhere feel that those political uncertainties between us, the conflicts is still taking over climate, that we should like really keep the differences aside and talk about climate action at the moment. And that's when we say transboundary, we mean that transboundary means that it has an impact despite having any boundaries. Okay. Whether the water bodies, like water issues, whether we're talking about air pollution, even, because, this is what transboundary
You're saying
means.
that, okay, so
and the other regions are very actively, like if you say, I'll give you one example, like Green Climate Fund has proposals from regions, like, Pacific would have different projects, South Africa would have different projects, African countries would have different projects. But when you talk about South Asian countries, Pakistan is nowhere. We're not ready to sit with India or other neighboring countries to talk about those, right? So we're not even pitching that international finance where we need to collaborate as a country, because when we go as a coalition, our voice is going to be more amplified, right? So that's the issue that's happening.
The region, for us not being able to come to an agreement is from both sides, right? Whether it's Pakistan or India.
Right.
And you're saying that we're not being able to rise above political differences. And of course, geographically, transboundaries, essentially, from what I understand you're saying, these issues don't recognize the boundaries that we have, and therefore we must work together to deal with them, and we're not being able to do that. Let me go to Fahad Malik Sahab, and then I'll come back to you. Ji, Fahad Sahab, can you hear me? Ji, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
We're talking about, of course, climate damage overall as far as smog is concerned, in the ability to tackle smog and our ability to deal with these issues. First of all, is it too little, too late in your opinion?
Look, it depends upon how we want to look at the problem. One of the primary issues that we face when it comes to dealing with smog is that it's an issue we talk about once a year. There's a week just in, start of November when everyone realizes, oh my God, this problem is going to cripple us. And that's when the conversation around this starts. One of the things that I always point out straight on this conversation regarding smog is it's not an issue specific to certain months of the year. Urban Unit, which is a wholly owned company of the government of Punjab, did a study on the emissions inventory of Lahore, for example, and that study suggests that over the past, between January 2019 till August 2024, over a span of 2070 days, we only had 28 good air days as per WHO standards. So the problem is, the biggest problem is that we don't realize how big of a problem smog is. It is not an issue which is specific to certain months of the year. It is an issue that exists throughout the year. Now, why does this issue exist? Well, this issue exists because there's mass consumerism, there's capitalism, where we still believe that having more cars on the road is a good thing. It's a sign of prosperity. We don't realize having the rich travel on public transport may be a better mechanism to reflect prosperity in a particular region. We still design our cities, our roads to accommodate more and more cars. Unfortunately, until and unless our development paradigm changes, until and unless we actually embrace the phrase that is used so unashamedly in our policy documents of sustainable development, until and unless we recognize that sustainable development is development that is climate sensitive, not development that tries to mitigate damages to the environment at the end of the day, there's not going to be any solution. There's no solution for smog that can be implemented tomorrow or the day after.
What is
It's
artificial rain going to do, which is something that the
it's
government
going to
Punjab
give
intends to?
us it's going to give us 200, 300 AQI days for 2 days. That's the most it's going to do. It's going to be a brief respite and not even a very good one. Good respite would be something that gives us good days, right? A respite that still keeps us in the unhealthy or the hazardous category is only making sure that people really aren't choking to death on the streets. That's the only thing an artificial rain is going to achieve, and for a handful of days only, not longer than that.
Okay, let me come back to you. We'll talk more about the measures that you feel are sustainable, long term, that we need to take as quick as possible. Munir Sahib, you heard what Fahad Malik Sahib is saying. He's saying that it's not going to really help, but just buy us more time. In terms of buying us more time, when we talk about COP29, when we talk about our goals, remember when I don't know if we had that conversation when the floods happened last year, and then about us and having gone there and having put forward our case, but in terms of the tangibles and what we got was minimal.
Yeah.
In terms of funds, of course, we are a third world country, we're short of funds, we need the money to be able to take those sustainable measures that Fahad Sahib talks about. Of course, it also necessitates a change in the way of life and all those things, but we really need the money. How do we do that if our case is not being heard?
In Pakistan case, certainly we need a lot of money if we have to save our people from the floods. It's not only about the floods, and it's not only about the money that we are looking for. In fact, we need to go for the adaptation strategies implemented on ground. Adaptation strategies, one of the component of these strategies is like we need to make aware of these disasters to the communities and ask them to replace, or displace themselves before they face certain disasters over there. But unfortunately, we didn't learn right from 2010 floods. Our communities again go back to the same places, and for most of the people, unfortunately, I may be wrong, but it has become an opportunity. They go over there, they built up again the same infrastructures and claim that we have lost our that much property, and it comes to accumulate the total losses once again. You go back to all the flood hit areas, you would see the same people have built up infrastructure over there. So I don't know how they could be convinced to take safety measures. But this is the one thing. Secondly, we have to take like some precautionary measures, for example.
That's what I want to focus on. I mean, in terms of precautionary measures,
do
we have the kind of funds available at this time to be able to even take those precautions?
We don't have funds, we don't have funds. Even the entire world does not have ample funds. This is what COP29 will be focusing on, to mobilize $1.2 trillion annually.
How
from
fruitful?
the private sectors, from the banking sectors.
Okay.
So now the private sector or the banking sector has to come, and Pakistan is also promoting green finances in Pakistan. So those funds has to be translated into certain measures for example, green energy, or like even if we have to channelize the water pathways, we have to use those funds for it. And
So we need,
of course, like we need
so quite
also,
frankly, we need the money.
we need the money.
And we haven't
We don't
really-
have the money.
We don't have the money.
We don't have the
Let me
money.
include Durre in this
Yeah.
conversation, because I know that he's been working on.
But I believe, like, if we mobilize our corporate sector and the banking sector, then we can have a certain subsidized development projects.
Okay, fair enough. Let me go to Durre. Durre, I know that you've been working on climate finance with the government also. As far as COP28 is concerned, do you think, was it able to achieve, you know, much of what it had set out to do, first of all, candidly speaking?
So basically, first of all, I would really like to publicly acknowledge that, you know, we as a country has taken a lot of leadership role in terms of climate governance, climate finance governance. Look, we're the very few nations who've actually got Climate Change Act, and now we're setting up Climate Change Authority. And speaking of, let's just take a step back and what has actually happened in COP28 and, you know, a COP previously. Pakistan basically advocated, you know, a voice from the global south that, hey, we need these funds, and we basically advocate that voice to set up loss and damage. Now, you know, there's this thing that, you know, the developed world is not putting enough money. There's lack of replenishment in the whole of Kitty, like Green Climate Fund, SAFES, now loss and damage. So the prime role for us is again to take that leadership role where we become that negotiator and take that voice forward that, look, we are the impactees. What happened in floods of 2022, 30 million people alone were sort of impacted. Now we need that money to sort of, reduce our vulnerabilities. So what's happening, I think the last 2 years were very positive in terms of climate finance units being set up in the centralized Ministry of Climate Change. Now they're trickling down to the provinces. Also, we have to acknowledge that, you know, we now have a national adaptation plan that came live last year. But now we need sort of funding to sort of also develop local strategies, local adaptation plan at the provinces level.
But Durre, when we talk about these adaptation plans that you're talking about, if we take what what Fahad Malik Saab said, are these fruitful when they will not translate into a way of life, and, you know, they will not trickle down? Because, you know, on the one hand, like you said, we have these plans, but how do we bring them to the level where they trickle down? And, you know, in a province like Punjab, for example, which is one of the most developed provinces, there is an acute problem. So that means that there is some issue that it's not being able to trickle down, right?
So we need to basically put a financial lens to all our strategies, which we're not doing. Like currently now we started doing that, you know, okay, what would it take to like place an early warning system in this area, or what would it do to like rehabilitate a certain river stream, you know, those sort of things. And we've started doing that. So earlier we did not even have a national adaptation strategy for the country. So even if you talk about international finance here, you talk about talk with the multilateral agencies, they will ask you for your provincial vision, strategies, you know, those sort of things. So this is what we've started doing. In the last 2 years, if you see, there have been reforms, but you're very right that now we do not have the finance, but we have to showcase them. You know, we're ready, you know, we have these strategies, these are the numbers, we've done our need assessment, we've done our vulnerability risk assessment. Those things were actually missing earlier. And like Sir said, that now private sector is also coming on board.
That's what I want to talk about. Are we taking the private sector on board now versus what it was last year when we go to COP29, for example? Do we have a better plan? Do we have a better means of trying to get as much funding possible from international donors, for example, or from the countries that can dole out that kind of fund? Are we better prepared in terms of what our preparedness is as a country, as a government?
So on the preparedness level, I would say yes and no. Yes, in terms that now, if you see in the last 2 years, this has been like a very fruitful year for us. You see that we've won Recharge Pakistan, a big project by GCF, We have, again, in a national support program has gotten first private sector finance equity investment by GCF. That was too. So in just a year, like 2 years, we've gotten few like we've gotten that international finance. Earlier there was a halt because this was not a priority. We did not realize that, okay, this is going to happen. So we are prepared, but we need more financing. That's the issue, because we're like the big populous country here. Basically magnitude is a lot here. We're talking about scale actually, and for that there's a shortfall. And when you talk about private sector, definitely, if you see that one of our banks, JS Bank, is now GCF accredited. We need more of a GCF Green Climate Fund accredited entities who can actually tap in that fund. And not just Green Climate Fund, there are other funds. We have Adaptation Fund globally, and Pakistan so far has just one small project from the Adaptation Fund. So, sometimes there are funding instruments available, but we're not, and I think lack of awareness is also one thing. And, if you talk about our public sector organization, they're not very well staffed also.
Because what, Fahad Saab mentioned is that he's right. It becomes a problem in November. It's not a problem for 1 month. It's a problem for all year round. And are we getting that? And you said also awareness. And I know that we talk about it more in November. So in terms of awareness, the question is, how do we get to that stage where it becomes an everyday life issue before it becomes the kind of issue that's unfortunately going to lead to, for example, major health problems or loss of lives or whatever, God forbid. So that's the question for us, right?
Yeah, and you need to also see that our current disaster management plans or portfolios are very much reactive in nature. Okay, so we always react. Okay, there's a flood, let's just mobilize the funds, let's just act. But we should have a vehicle that should be proactive in approach, right? And that's where you do climate-induced disaster risk management sort of work. And now we do have a disaster risk financing strategy, by the way, and we will be presenting to the world that, look, we do have a climate disaster risk strategy. We need to do more of a work in terms of diversifying our financial instrument. Do you have climate risk disaster insurance? No, we do not have that. So, we need to diversify those instruments also to tackle some of these actions. Grants alone, I'm sorry, cannot just solve the problem. You need to either plug in money from your own, financing, or you need to reach out to commercial, like Sir said, banks. That's important. Need to place in guarantee schemes. And this works very well for Pakistan. You saw solar, like every house has a solar right now, and this was a successful model. So if private sector comes on board, we can at least achieve a lot in terms of.
Let me go to Fahad on this. Fahad, as far as, like you said, unless we change the way that we function as a society, unless we change the way that we, and you mentioned public transport is just one factor. The question is, as a country, that means a whole change, a different way of thinking. Isn't that a very long-term objective? And we don't seem to have that kind of time for this now, right?
Yeah, the thing is, looking for quick solutions never really gives you, good results. Couple of things I'd like to point out before I directly respond to your question, which is the question of finance, which will come in whenever you talk about any adaptive measures or you talk about mitigation even. Finances is the first question that will inevitably come up. Now, there are two ways to look at finance. One is to see whether we as a country, Pakistan, which contributes about 1.2% of the total global emissions of fossil fuels, should we really be asked to dig deep into our own pockets and somehow find the money to fix the problems associated with climate change? No. The short answer to that is no. And that's exactly where the Loss and Damage Fund comes in, and where the global green finance under the UNFCCC was supposed to come in, which should have had at least $100 billion in it right now, and only has like $120 million. So that's one way of looking at finance. The other is that knowing that the world really isn't queuing up to help us, knowing that people aren't, the global north isn't willing to take responsibilities for its actions which are causing loss in the global south. Where do we go from here? We can either just sit and say, oh, we can't do anything since we are not being given the money. But the thing is, we as a country spend money every single day. Whenever we decide to make a new signal-free corridor in our urban centers, that's money that's going to be spent on it. Whenever we decide to add a new underpass, a new overhead, a new ring road, a new motorway, we are making decisions about money. Until and unless we start factoring in climate adaptation into this expense, yes, we are not going to see any solutions. immediate solution, there is none. It is as simple as that. There are two things which need to be done in the immediate for us to not have this conversation 5 years later. We may still have it in the 4 years in between. The first is that we need to fix our fuel problem. We are one of the few countries in the world now which are still operating on Euro 2 fuels. Anything less than Euro 5 is frankly suicidal for a country to adopt at this point in time. That's the first thing that we need to fix. With that comes with reduced dependence on private vehicles. With that comes the responsibility to increase our monitoring. Now, again, how does thinking green about money look like? One way of doing monitoring is for your provincial regulator to buy 200 vehicles and say we are going to picket the roads and try to find vehicles which are emitting visible smoke from their exhaust. That's one way of looking at finance. The other way of looking at finance is, okay, let's have mass monitoring. We know that this is a problem which exists starting right here from Lahore up to Pindi, going down to Multan and even further. We know the problem exists. Why is it that we still don't have enough monitoring equipment to be able to, for example, determine which direction the pollution is flowing to and where it is flowing from, so that we can come up with strategies which are targeted, which directly address the prime pollutants of the problem? So that's another way of looking at finance. Let's not buy cars, let's buy meters, let's place them all over the place, trying to come up with data that can guide our policies going forward. So while yes, there is no immediate solution, while yes, finance is a huge problem, it is not that we don't have money. We have enough money to decide to, for example, build a new city next to Lahore. We had 6 billion to give to a new entity that was formed overnight, and overnight 6 billion rupees were transferred in its bank account so that it could acquire over 100,000 acres of agricultural land. So that was
we
money
can't,
to tha.
but
Secondly,
we
just
can't,
one last
but
thing.
in terms of sustainable, gee,
Another place that you can find money is healthcare. One of the things that we completely forget in this whole conversation is that even by the health department of the government of Punjab, even going by their figures, the number of people inducted for respiratory issues and heart diseases in our province has increased 30%, and it goes even higher during the specific months when smog is at its highest. So that is expense again, right? That's one way to spend money on the problem, i.e., fixing the people who are facing the consequences. The other is you save that money by repurposing that money to ensure that there's not a big enough problem to land them in hospitals to begin with. So yeah, that's
fair enough.
again, it's a different way of looking at it.
Let me go to Munir Sahib. Munir Sahib, if you heard what Fahad is saying, I think, but it's too impractical to expect, for example, the government to ban vehicles, and only allow a certain amount immediately. So it has to be done also, and of course, with the government also, that for them, it's certainly an issue that they are prioritizing at this moment. We are looking at what's happening, with the closure of schools, within, as far as trying to get artificial rain, as far as Lahore, particularly Punjab, is concerned, and the way that they're trying to deal with it. So it has to be done in a very systemic manner. Do you think that, and so what is the best way to sort of approach the issue, in your opinion?
You're right. We have to approach the issue quite systematically. First of all, I would like to add to Fahad Saab's point of view that a couple of years back, Pakistan also introduced Euro 5. Pakistan State Oil and a couple of other companies. They were, I don't know, what quantity they are supplying into the market as Euro 5 grade, but it was, and Fahad can correct me about it as well. Secondly, systematic approach, if we talk about one is the immediate reaction to such kind of issues that we need to go about it, and it includes like artificial rain or like closing down and taking care. It's
but
like
he's talking about preventive
SOS basis. That's what.
So he's talking about preventive measures.
Of course, like in medium term, if we say like afterwards, we have to We cannot close down most of the vehicles, but we can fine them heavily, or like we can ask them to take necessary equipment installed in their vehicles so that it shall not emit emissions. Their emissions shall be reduced that way. And there are many types of filters they are used, and for maybe like 2 decades or 3 decades, the Europe is using such kind of filters into their vehicles. And secondly, the industry and the brick kilns that are the most polluters, and we have to take care of their violations. And I don't know like what authorities, what EPS, provincial EPS, Environmental Protection Agencies are doing.
But I think one of the things that Durre mentioned, and I think that even before when we spoke earlier on, I remember having a conversation with the Disaster Management Authority with regard to floods again, and it was something that came up, that a proactive approach rather than a reactive one is what is needed as far as climate change or climate damage is concerned. So now that we are talking about this, and of course we don't know what will happen in the summer, it is expected that things will again, God forbid, get worse. So are we moving towards that kind of proactive approach at this time?
I don't see like very proactive actions. We have policies, but we lack implementations.
Let's ask.
And we need to take certain measures, or like we should have certain proactive teams to implement the strategies that, or the policies of the governments that we have agreed on, or and this is most important.
Durre, like we were earlier having a conversation, and you did mention that the government seems to be very proactive with regard to this. What are some of the actions that you think are in the pipeline, and also with regard to COP29, where you're working on those issues?
Right. So first of all, like Fahad Sahab also said that, we have to look at a sectoral lens, and pretty much, we have to sort of integrate climate planning, mainstreaming within all these sectors, whether it's agriculture, whether it's disaster management, whether it's health, because we do have money, we do have our regular modus operandi, and we have to fit in the climate picture within it, right? So coming back on what is government doing, like for example, very quick examples, like for example, Benazir Income Support Program, right? That's just like a social protection which actually is given when to people like who are impacted, we give them cash, right? Now what's happening that even BIS working closely with different multilateral development agencies, they now started to make it more shock responsive, and social protection has the adaptation lens, where they're sort of mapping that, okay, what are the hotspots, the vulnerable areas where in terms of disaster they could disburse that sort of money, those sort of pilots are underway. So that's one area. Similarly, there's efforts that are underway on the regenerative agriculture side as well. Okay, because our seasonal patterns are now shift. With this whole climate change, the sowing, harvesting patterns are shift. So the existing projects are now also looking at the regenerative, like what are the climate smart agriculture projects that we could do with different development agencies that are supporting and funding. Then there are different agencies that are also sort of supporting in the rollout of National Adaptation Plan at the prevention level, whether it's KP, Punjab, Sindh, because we have right now done the National Adaptation Plan at the very centralized level, but we are doing it on the prevention level. So that's important. My colleague here mentioned that, we don't know about we don't have a data right now. So there's a lot of work that's going on the evidence-based policy making and on the data collection, especially in the scoping, like, okay, what could be the decarbonization plans for Pakistan for hard to, difficult to abate sectors like textile, steel, cement units, fertilizer for that matter. Different development agencies are working there in that angle. So there are a couple of efforts that are underway, but definitely, like I said, that we need to expedite.
Munir mentioned in terms of enforcement. Do you think that in your experience where you've interacted and the data that you've accumulated also and the work that you've done, do you agree that we need on-ground implementation, which is where we're really lacking?
No, when you talk about enforcement, we really need to see that, when our climate change authority is actually going to be implemented properly, because there's still discussion. We do have an act, but that's not implemented, right? So when you talk about enforcement, we need to strengthen our efforts around, regulatory aspect.
You think that more legislation is required?
That's required, whether Sir is talking about vehicle emission, inspection and all those sort of things, that's not regulated at the moment, we have to do strictly those compliances are very much mandatory. Sir talked about monitoring evaluations.
Yes.
That's also important. We do have centralized M&E units, but are they doing active monitoring evaluation? They're not. So, we have to also strengthen our enforcement.
So is that, do you know, or do you have any knowledge of the fact whether those enforcement with regard to that or is underway with, promulgation of laws with regard to that? If there's being, thought put into that, then must be, the legal wing or must be working on that, and those are important areas also for them to be then regulated and enforced, right?
Yeah, so like I said, that in last 2 years, it has been a lot of traction around climate governance reforms in Pakistan. And yes, there is effort underway now with the Climate Change Authority. So please do correct me. The efforts that they want, and they want more financial support to also operationalize the, act, to regulate that sort of thing. And then, they're making climate finance units at like a centralized level, at a provincial level as well. Like I said, that, our Ministry of Climate Change is very understaffed at the moment. There is active support that's flowing in to sort of make it more resourceful so that they could actually communicate with the international financiers. So that are the few things that are happening. But definitely, like I said, that, we need more money. Like COP is going to be very useful, not just in terms of negotiations, in terms of what we need as a country or as a region, but also in terms of learning and also in terms of exchanging the knowledge that what we are doing. You know that we are the only country that has the first blue carbon project, and it's transactional, and it's the only one that's making the most money in the world. But again, this is driven by an international company. It's not very much, we don't have a local registries at the moment. We don't have carbon markets in place. So that process is going on. There are different policy frameworks and instruments the government is working on so that there could be a domestic buying and selling like it's happening in India. So those are some of the efforts. But so, the COP-like forums
but those efforts are also, I mean, this is the first that we're really hearing about it. So, I mean, we need more because, of course, I mean, hope is needed also. And we need to know how much effort is really going into this as far as the government also is concerned. So perhaps, we need more, we need this to come out more as far as, publicity on these issues are concerned. And like you mentioned, this project and the fact that Pakistan is pioneering it, you said. Yeah, let me go to Fahad on this. Fahad, as far as this issue of smog is concerned, earlier on we spoke about the fact that, as far as boundaries are concerned and the fact that, of course, this is a problem across the border also. Is there, in your opinion, can we collaborate on this? Do you think there's going to be some collaboration between the possibility of collaboration between these two countries, Pakistan and India, on this issue that doesn't recognize these borders? And of course, it's being faced all over.
Look, my general opinion has always been never say never. There's nothing that can't be done. We ended up getting a water treaty, no matter how good and bad that was. We ended up coming to an arrangement with a very hostile neighbor once. So there's precedent for it. But one of the things that sort of enabled us to do that was the availability of data of how important that water is to us, and in what months and in what proportions and so on and so forth. Before, there's the two ways that you can have a transboundary conversation. One is an amicable one between two friendly countries. Unfortunately, that situation doesn't exist. It is a shared problem, despite the fact that it's a shared problem between the two countries. The other way to go about it is to build a case and say that, look, this is the exact consequence of actions being taken in your territorial area that are directly affecting me. One of the first post-World War II treaties that Paris and London ended up entering into was on air quality, and it was because of the post-industrial, the industrial revolution and coal-generated power causing issues transboundary between the two. Now, how did they go about it? Well, they relied on data first and foremost, that look, this is where our problem is, and this is your contribution to our problem. When we look at government studies from the urban unit, they don't mention the neighbor at all. When we look at statements coming out of government ministers, they're saying anywhere between 10% to 30% to 50% is India's fault. Fine. If it's their fault, we should definitely find a mechanism to hold them accountable for it. But we can't until and unless we have the data to back our claims. My apprehension is that we don't want to collect the data because we may end up concluding that there's really not a lot of finger pointing that we can do. But until and unless we have data to support our claims that our neighbor is primarily responsible for the problems that we are facing today, unfortunately, there's no realistic conversation to be had with it. It's as simple as that.
I think that, from what I conclude from this conversation, there is sufficient data, isn't there, Munir Saab and Durre? What's your opinion on this?
About air quality, certainly we don't have ample
Okay.
data, and even we don't have set up like to monitor it. First of all, we have to take certain measures where we can measure the kind of air pollution, and even we don't have data how much waste is collected or like disposed of every day. And even in Islamabad, we don't see the 100% waste is collected.
Durre, is there are efforts being made to collect this kind of data, which is extremely important for us to be able to get to some kind of solution?
So basically, there are effort underway by SPARCO and NDRMF to sort of map some of the hotspots that are vulnerable regions. But then, like I said, that air pollution itself it's quite unique because you have to have data from the vehicle emissions, you have to see the industrial units, and we don't have those sensors. There's a technology that's required to sort of collect that data, because all over like abroad, their countries are reporting on their emissions, right, in their sustainability. We're very, very behind. But so we don't have that the air pollution data, but yes, we have the vulnerability data, the loss and damage data, and I think there are effort underway by NDRMF, National Disaster Management, and this SPARCO. We're trying to collect this, but then it is not micro level. It's just like some areas where we be just speaking on the basis of some locales. Like Lahore, we were just having.
So before we conclude that there is, or we say that there might, the issues are that we are, there's technology. There's a problem as far as technology is concerned. There's also a problem with regard to the funds. There's also a problem with regard to the kind of expertise that is available. So overall, those are the deficient areas, and it's not just one area. So overall, we are, so to speak, our hands are tied. And with regard to that, we need, like you said also, then it all does it all amount to having more funds to be able to have that kind of technology that maps the kind of data that we need and for us to move forward from there.
Yeah, and most important is also like we have to sit with our neighboring countries, and we have to like admit that they're way ahead in terms of using that technology, whether it's IoT, AI. They're very fast with early warning systems. So we need to learn. We need to go directly to our neighbors to also do a lot of knowledge exchange, because that's going to really help us. And like Fahad Saab said that there's no harm in sitting together and working out as a solution, because ultimately they're also going to affect them and us. So,
but that's not us. I mean, that's not on our side. Overall, we've also seen a consistent failure from the other side to come and sort of join.
But COP gives you a great opportunity to come together and talk about these issues, because they're pavilions. Because we are representing the same bloc. We all come from South Asia. We're global South, and I think opportunities like COP are once in a year where we could collaborate with them and work around these solutions.
Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us today. Munir Ahmed Saab, thank you for joining us. Durreshawar Mahmood, thank you for being with us. Fahad Malik Saab, thank you for being with us today. Overall, I think this was an extremely interesting discussion where we could, we were able to sort of get an inkling of the kind of issues that are, that we face as a country as far as climate damage, and as a result, we have changing weather patterns, and because of that, the kind of difficulties we are facing as far as health is concerned. Overall, as far as cities like, for example, provinces like Punjab, when we look at Lahore, we look at even Islamabad and Rawalpindi, the threat that overall is there, of which smog is just the tip of the iceberg. But still, I mean, there is, of course, sincerity all around, and at the same time a consistent realization that we are short of funds. We are also, as a third world country, short of the kind of technology that is needed to be able to have the kind of research that we would need for then, to follow up and have be able to deal with these issues. And the government at this time seems to be working on all those fronts very, very sincerely. We talked about COP29 and the fact that it's going to be one of those forums that does manage to get us to a level of understanding, also to deal with the kind of issues we need, the kind of collaboration we need, for example, from across the border also, and the kind of issues that we face and share with a country like India, for example. Thank you so much for being with us today on Perspective.